What if I told you that one of the world's most modern cities filled with neon lights, skyscrapers, and busy streets was, once at the heart of empires, wars, and quiet resilience? Behind Hong Kong's shining skyline lies a story shaped not just by trade and finance, but by battles fought, flags changed, and people who endured it all. In 1841, during the First Opium War between Britain and the Qing dynasty of China, British forces occupied Hong Kong Island. The conflict arose from disputes over trade, diplomatic relations, and British demands for open access to Chinese ports, particularly for the opium trade. As a result of the British victory, the Treaty of Nanking was signed in 1842, officially ceding Hong Kong Island to Britain. This marked the beginning of Hong Kong's long period under British colonial rule, which would last until 1997. In the years that followed, the colony expanded when Britain acquired the Kowloon Peninsula in 1860 and later leased the new territories. In 1898, for 99 years, from a military standpoint, Hong Kong's natural deep harbour and geographical location made it an ideal strategic base for British naval operations and trade routes throughout Asia. The British established military barracks, forts, and coastal defences across the territory to protect it from external threats, especially from rival powers like France, Russia, and later Japan. Hong Kong played a vital logistical role during major military operations, including the Boxer Rebellion and both World Wars. British military presence also served as a deterrent against instability spreading from mainland China, especially during periods of revolution, civil war, and the rise of communism. During the Cold War, Hong Kong's proximity to Communist China made it a frontline post for British intelligence and military observation. While the city developed rapidly into a financial and trading hub, the British garrison remained a symbol of colonial control. Military installations, including the Victoria Barracks and the Royal Navy base at HMS Tamar, became familiar features of the city. Though not often involved in direct combat, the British forces maintained a readiness posture and engaged in policing roles during riots and unrest. The First Opium War, fought between 1839 and 1842, was a pivotal conflict that marked the beginning of modern Chinese history and foreign colonial influence in East Asia. The war was triggered by tensions between the British Empire and the Qing dynasty over trade imbalances, particularly the British export of opium into China. For decades, Britain had imported large quantities of tea, silk, and porcelain from China, paying in silver. To counter this economic outflow, British merchants began selling opium, grown in British-controlled India, to Chinese traders. The opium trade led to widespread addiction in China and a drain on its silver reserves, prompting the Qing government to act. In 1839, Chinese official Lin Zexu, appointed by the emperor to suppress the opium trade, confiscated and destroyed large amounts of British-owned opium in Canton. This action angered British merchants and the government, which viewed it as an attack on free trade and British property. Diplomatic talks failed, and Britain responded by deploying its modern navy to China's shores. British forces quickly demonstrated their military superiority, capturing coastal cities and blockading key ports with advanced warships and artillery. Chinese defenses, based on traditional weaponry and outdated tactics, were unable to withstand the assault. The conflict ended with the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, which forced China to make several humiliating concessions. Hong Kong Island was ceded to Britain, marking the beginning of its colonial presence in the region. Additionally, China had to open several ports to British trade, grant extraterritorial rights to British citizens, and pay a large indemnity. The war not only altered the balance of power in East Asia, but also exposed the Qing dynasty's vulnerabilities to Western imperialism. It set a precedent for future conflicts and unequal treaties imposed on China by foreign powers. The Second Sino-Japanese War began in 1937 as a full-scale conflict between China and Imperial Japan, and it became part of the broader events of World War II. Although Hong Kong was a British colony at the time, Its strategic location made it a valuable military target for Japan's expansionist ambitions in East Asia. On December 8, 1941, just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces launched an invasion of Hong Kong from mainland China. The British, along with Canadian and Indian troops and local volunteers, attempted to defend the colony. But they were vastly outnumbered and poorly equipped compared to the Japanese army. The battle lasted for 18 days, marked by intense fighting across the new territories, Kowloon and Hong Kong Island. Despite pockets of fierce resistance, Japanese forces advanced steadily, using coordinated attacks and air raids to weaken the defenders. The lack of reinforcements and supplies severely hampered the British-led defense. On December 25, 1940, one now known as Black Christmas, the British governor surrendered to the Japanese, and Hong Kong fell under occupation. The occupation period was harsh and brutal. Japanese military rule imposed strict control over the population, and thousands of residents suffered from food shortages, forced labor, arbitrary arrests, and executions. The local Chinese population faced particularly harsh treatment, as Japan sought to suppress resistance and assert dominance. During this time, civil liberties were suspended, and Japanese currency replaced local money. Schools, newspapers, and public institutions were reorganized under Japanese authority. Resistance groups continued to operate underground, but any opposition was met with swift punishment. The occupation deeply affected daily life and caused lasting trauma among the population. In August 1945, following Japan's defeat in World War II, British forces returned to re-establish control over Hong Kong, marking the end of nearly 4 years of Japanese military occupation. After World War II, as the Cold War emerged between the Western powers and communist states, Hong Kong became a frontline observation post for British interests in Asia. The rise of the Chinese Communist Party and the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949 brought new geopolitical realities to Hong Kong's doorstep. Just across the border, mainland China was undergoing massive political transformation, and fears of a communist spillover into the colony were real and immediate. The British responded by reinforcing their military presence in Hong Kong, turning it into both a defensive outpost and a hub for intelligence operations in the region. The British garrison included regular army troops, the Royal Navy, and the Royal Air Force, supported by local units like the Royal Hong Kong Regiment. Military installations were maintained across the territory, from coastal artillery positions to barracks and radar stations. Surveillance and monitoring of the border with China were constant, especially as waves of refugees fled political turmoil, famine, and persecution from the mainland. These refugees were sometimes viewed as potential security risks, adding to the sense of unease and urgency within the colonial administration. Tensions peaked during major Cold War flashpoints, such as the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Though not directly involved in combat, Hong Kong's ports and airfields played logistical roles in these conflicts. The city also became a haven for spies, journalists, and diplomats operating in the shadows of global ideological rivalry. British military forces were occasionally mobilized to suppress internal unrest, such as the 1967 leftist riots, which were inspired by the Cultural Revolution in China. The British military was crucial in restoring order during that period, often clashing with rioters and discovering bomb-making networks. Throughout the Cold War, Hong Kong remained under watchful military protection as a symbol of Western presence at the edge of Communist China. During the Vietnam War and its aftermath, Hong Kong became an unexpected front line in a humanitarian crisis rather than a battlefield. As the war in Vietnam escalated through the 1960s and eventually concluded in 1975 with the fall of Saigon, waves of refugees began fleeing the region. These individuals, later known as the Boat People, came primarily from South Vietnam, and many risked their lives crossing the South China Sea in overcrowded makeshift vessels to escape communist persecution, re-education camps, and economic collapse. Though Hong Kong was not a participant in the Vietnam War, its geographic location and British colonial administration made it one of the main destinations for these desperate refugees. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, tens of thousands of Vietnamese arrived in Hong Kong's waters, many in need of food, shelter, and medical attention. The British colonial government initially offered temporary refuge, setting up detention and refugee camps across the territory, including facilities at places like Sham, Shui Po, Kai Tak, and later the Whitehead Detention Centre. Though public sympathy existed, the sudden and growing influx of refugees led to social strain, political debate, and logistical challenges. The camps were often overcrowded and under-resourced, leading to tension both among the refugee population and between refugees and local communities. Hong Kong authorities, under British guidance, implemented a screening policy in 1988 to distinguish between political refugees and economic migrants. Those deemed genuine refugees were eligible for resettlement in third countries like the United States, Canada, and Australia. Others faced repatriation, sometimes forcibly. Despite the difficulties, Hong Kong's role in the refugee crisis reflected a complex blend of compassion, political calculation, and administrative control. The crisis gradually subsided by the late 1990s, leaving a legacy of humanitarian response amid Cold War-era displacement. The 1997 Handover of Hong Kong marked a historic turning point as sovereignty over the territory was transferred from the United Kingdom to the People's Republic of China. This transition followed the expiration of the 99-year lease of the new territories and was formalized through the Sino-British Joint Declaration signed in 1984. The agreement outlined that Hong Kong would be governed under the principle of one country, two systems, allowing it to retain its capitalist economy, legal system, and civil liberties for 50 years after the handover. In preparation for this transition, British military forces gradually scaled down their presence, with final ceremonial departures occurring just before the midnight handover on July 1, 1997. Following the handover, the Chinese government established the Hong Kong garrison of the People's Liberation Army PLA, which assumed defense responsibilities for the region. The PLA presence was symbolically important but intentionally restrained, with Chinese authorities emphasizing in local affairs unless invited by the Hong Kong government. The garrison has remained largely out of public view, conducting training and operations quietly, and staying within the terms of the Basic Law, which governs post-handover Hong Kong. Their bases, inherited from the former British military, include facilities in Central, Shek Kong, and Stanley Dot in the years since. Hong Kong's security dynamics have evolved with growing tension over autonomy and civil rights. Mass protests in 2014 and especially in 2019 sparked global attention, as citizens voiced concerns over perceived encroachments by Beijing. Though local police handled these events, the question of PLA intervention loomed over public discourse. In 2020, Beijing imposed a national security law on Hong Kong, signaling a shift toward tighter control. While the PLA has not directly intervened in public unrest, its quiet presence continues to represent the transformation of Hong Kong's military and political landscape in the post-colonial era. The story of Hong Kong's military history is not one of endless battles, but of a city shaped by the forces of empire, conflict, resilience, and change. From the arrival of British warships in the 19th century to the brief but brutal Japanese occupation, from Cold War tensions to the waves of refugees fleeing nearby wars, and finally to the quiet transfer of sovereignty in 1997, Hong Kong has stood at the crossroads of global power and human endurance. Though it never had a military of its own, the presence of foreign armies and the weight of regional struggles left lasting marks on its identity. Yet, through every era of uncertainty, the people of Hong Kong have remained strong, adapting with grace and determination. Their spirit is the true guardian of the city, a reminder that even in the shadow of military might, the courage of a people can shine the brightest.